I call the August 27th meeting of the Planning Board to order. First on the agenda is any kind of public comment that anybody wishes to make that has nothing to do with what's on the agenda tonight.
2 minutes.
Yep. Please make this very brief.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, citizens, and friends of Falmouth. Last week, I spoke about the Stretch Energy Code and that it differs very little from the Base Energy Code and that it can be beneficial to the budgets of people in affordable housing. Tonight, I just would like to identify a few of the general benefits of the Stretch Energy Code. Number one, the Stretch Energy Code would bring more uniformity in codes for builders across the Cape and the Commonwealth because 272 of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts have already adopted the Stretch Energy Code, and because here on Cape Cod, 10 of the 15 cities and towns on Cape Cod have already adopted the code. The Stretch Energy Code, therefore, is a code that most builders on the Cape are already familiar with. And adoption of the Stretch Energy Code levels the field for builders who want to reduce greenhouse gases at the same time that they offer their residential and commercial customers buildings that minimize ongoing energy costs. So that with the Stretch Energy Code, they wouldn't have to compete with other builders who might undercut them by building less efficient buildings. The Stretch Energy Code stimulates innovation, business expansion, and jobs in energy efficiency. As I said, it reduces greenhouse gases, and that will be in line with Falmouth's own Climate Protection Action Plan. Finally, the Stretch Energy Code, if adopted by Falmouth, would make Falmouth eligible for designation as a Massachusetts Green Community, which would bring a number of grants for new boilers, new air conditioning systems, new ventilation, insulation, and so on in municipal buildings and school buildings. A lot of benefits. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
We move on to approval not required plans that have been received between August 21st and August 27th. The applicant, oh, sorry, I skipped over minutes. Those are important. Mr. Secretary.
Madam Chair, I recommend approval of the minutes of August 13th and August 20th, 2019, as corrected.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Geez, you missed 1 week and you,
Now,
Well, see, it's not on my script. There's no minutes in there.
oh, geez, you missed on ours.
Okay, that's my old one, I guess, sorry.
now you can go home.
Yep. Okay, so approval not required plans. The applicant is Robert Burke for a plan of land to merge a portion of parcel 10 to parcel 10C, located at 3 Clark Street and 56 Old Barnstable Road, Falmouth Engineering. Do we have somebody here? Yes.
Is that it up there? No?
It is not.
No, that's-
What the hell's that doing up there?
Madam Chairman, I don't know what that
Feel
is.
free to close that mic. You,
I don't know how to close it on here.
I don't know how to engineer plans, so I'll help you.
Let's try that. Yeah, that looks more familiar. Thank you. All right, I can work with that. Oh, you have it for me already. You're awesome. Thank you.
no, I never hear that.
Madam Chairman, members of the board, my name is Michael Borselli from Falmouth Engineering, and I represent the applicant, Robert Burke. The applicant is proposing to make a minor modification to property that is located on the corner of Clark and on 3 streets, Old Barnstable Road at the bottom of the page, Clark Street on the left side, and Meadow View Drive on the top. The property in question includes this property that meanders all the way over to here and then runs along a common boundary with Lot 1 and 2. Over to here, it contains this house number 3 on Clark Street. The applicant also is including as a common owner number 56 Old Barnstable Road. The property is held by the same owner, and His primary residence is here at number 56. He's intending to sell off number 3 and the land with it. Ironically, this parcel actually contains this section here, which is 50 by 100. So it's 5,000 square feet that we're intending to merge with this lot we are now calling Lot B. The reason we would like to merge it is because the driveway and garden that are associated with number 56 are actually on this large parcel, and before they make the sale of the larger parcel, they'd like to incorporate this into this house lot, so there'd be no encroachments. So the new lot will be Lot B, and it'll be increased in size by 5,000 square feet, and the new Lot A will be reduced in size by 5,000 square feet. Neither lot will be more non-conforming to zoning. In fact, this lot will be more conforming to current zoning. It'll have additional area and additional frontage on Old Barnstable Road. And that's it.
Motion to endorse?
Second?
Well, first of all, are there any questions at all on this plan? Okay. Motion,
Moved and seconded?
second?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Public hearing.
Look at the plan.
The applicant is Hui, site plan review application to construct a new approximately 50,000 square foot facility at 360 Woods Hole Road, Hui's Quistic campus, and associated site improvements. Now, I want you all to know that this must be referred to the Cape Cod Commission because of its size, but we also must open the hearing and get a brief presentation. And then any questions or concerns that you have, we will simply take down to pass on, but there will be no discussion of that, because I don't know how many of you know the process. But when it goes to the commission, they could change a lot of things and it would come back here. So there's no point in doing anything but making them aware of the concerns of the public and some of the board concerns that they can take into consideration. Now, for the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that introduction. My name is Jeannie Campus. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Nutter, McLennan and Fish. I'm here on behalf of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. With me is Colin Reed. He's the Deputy Secretary of the corporation at Hui. As the chair indicated, we are here tonight on a purely procedural matter. Our role here today is limited to simply obtaining a mandatory referral to the Cape Cod Commission from this board, which will in turn suspend your procedural time clock for reviewing this application. As Madam Chair said, there is a lot of public process in the future. First at the Cape Cod Commission, because this is a mandatory development of regional impact due to its size, and then back here before the board on site plan review, pending what we hope is an approval at the Cape Cod Commission. However, the referral tonight is the first step in the process, and it is mandated by the Cape Cod Commission Act, as you know. Because the board did notice this for a public hearing, we would like to briefly describe the project with the understanding that it is subject to change before the Cape Cod Commission. What is proposed? Do you want me to put it up? Got all my stuff on here, sorry. Do I just go to this?
And we're,
How do I
that
go
was open for, so
Can I go-
scrolling up to the top of the page.
I don't think we need this much detail for tonight. But I'll leave it at that, that's good. So what we are proposing is what Hui's proposing is a new facility at its Quistic campus, which is located at 360 Woods Hole Road. It's approximately a 124 acre parcel that Hui owns. The proposed building is 3 stories high and approximately 50,000 square feet. There will be associated parking, landscaping, and other site improvements along with it. The building is anticipated to support new and emerging technology and marine science, as well as house Hui's rigging group. And it'll also house a new incubator and innovation group and contain laboratory and collaboration space, as well as shelled space for future uses. We understand there will likely be questions and comments from members of the public, which we will be happy to address when we return to the board following Cape Cod Commission review, and we're here to discuss more of the substantive details of this project. That ends my very brief presentation. Thank you.
Does any of the board have some concerns that they want the commission to consider? Jim?
I would hope that the commission would look at our local comprehensive plan and how this, everything about this fits with every aspect of our local comprehensive plan. What's he doing there? And I'm also concerned of what this development of this site has done to the sky. I'm a night sailor in my lifetime, and now this area of town, when you sail out beyond the Ulec, it's totally loomed up and lights up the whole sky, and I think it's just too much light, and I think they should deal with those two issues. I think, look at our local comprehensive plan. We can only talk about shape and size of the building. The use is up to them. But height, light, and transportation are the areas that I'm concerned about, and I hope the Cape Cod takes that, and Cape Cod Commission takes those into consideration.
So you're looking at the dark skies
The dark
concept.
sky aspect, the size of the building, and, which we get to comment on, and, you know, the whole area. I mean, it has changed our town, and it continually changes the dynamics of that neighborhood with the amount of light that they put up in the sky at night.
Okay. Anybody else on the board have any concerns that they, Bob?
Yeah, when I was looking at the drawings upstairs and looking at the parking lot, there's a lot of pavement. I was just wondering if there's gonna be any solar canopies installed over to cover the parking?
That could be for the Cape Cod Commission.
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that right now before you today, but we will look into things like that and be prepared to address them when we return.
Okay.
Thanks.
You are taking notes as to these concerns, I see, so, okay, all right. Does anybody else on the board have any concerns that they would like to see the commission address? Okay, anybody from the public? And if you do, please come up and state your name and state your question for.
My name is Richard Hugus. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. I'm an abutter. That's the reason I'm here tonight, and I wanted to voice my objection to the whole project as an abutter and as a resident of Falmouth. This project is a huge project. It's taking place outside of Ring Road, where Hui originally said they were going to confine their development. I've sent comments to everybody. I won't get into the details because there's other people who want to speak, but this project won't be taking place in isolation. The Steamship Authority is doing a lot of work down there in Woods Hole, and Woods Hole is just too crowded now.
Mr. Hugus, your comments have to be limited to what they can take and look at from the Cape Cod Commission. It will come back here after the commission does their thing.
All right, well, I've sent my comments to everybody, including the Cape Cod Commission. I'll just say that when the people of Woods Hole are up against an institution that has the power of Hui, we need your support, because as individual citizens, we just don't have the power to really counter a project of this size, and that's why we need public representatives like you to help us.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes? Please come up to the microphone.
Good evening. I'm also Richard Lovering. I'm in a butter. Little nervous.
We're friendly, don't worry.
I am a little confused in that with all the previous projects that have occurred with Hui and the Quissa campus, I don't recall ever having notice from the planning board about it. And I thought that was unusual. It's always gone through the notices come from the commission. I've never heard anything from the town before. So that's one thing. Going by what the enterprise said, which is pretty much the same as the presentation, it describes the area as 123 acres, 124 acres. And I think when they originally built the ring road, it was described as 183 acres. And I think it's confusing because it's chunked up into these big parcels. So when it says that this is 124 acres, it's right, okay, yes it is, but it's also includes the part that goes up to Oyster Pond Road and along the shore and stuff like that. So it's a little misleading, I think. What else was I gonna comment on? I like to echo Mr. Fox with the lighting and all the noise, everything that goes with a big project and the resulting building, the stuff that the neighborhood has to deal with right now. Excuse me, we listen to the ventilation systems from the roof, the dumpster guys, all that kind of stuff, you know. Depends which way the wind blows, whether you can hear a generator or not. So that's a concern. You talked about the parking. I know that this project is in conjunction with the rebuilding of the dock in Woods Hole, moving people from Woods Hole out of the village into the campus. And the paper only mentions 8 people, and I noticed that the plans show the 3rd floor is empty, so I'm assuming more people from the village are gonna come up and occupy that area. I don't know. Either that or, you know, there's gonna be another building. The other thing I was gonna mention is that if there is a plan to connect this building to the housing complex on Oyster Pond Road and connect that to the receiving department via any kind of a roadway. Right now, we're reducing the trips to the village, but the abutters still are gonna get that same traffic too, so that's a concern. And I think that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. You had a number of concerns that the commission certainly should look at, I think. Let me see, is there anybody else who wishes to comment from the public? Paul?
In light of the comment from previous speaker, I'd like to read into the record the public notice of this hearing.
Good move. We didn't miss that, he's just timing it right.
Public notice of the Hui project was published on August 9th, 2019, and 48 abutters were notified by regular mail.
Thank you, Paul.
And we'll interrupt.
So there are a number of concerns. Mr. Hugus was concerned about the original promise to only build within the ring road. And our second speaker, and I did not catch your last name, sir. Lovering. Okay, Mr. Lovering was concerned about the statement of acreage. That there's a lot of concern there, and noise, which I do know. They'd be looking for noise mitigation of the HVAC systems and other things. So how that could be taken care of. And whether there was an accurate statement as to how many people would actually be occupying the building, since the 3rd floor is shown to be empty. Am I missing something here that? Anyway, I know notes are being taken. Yes,
Excuse me,
you have to come up
Just
there
go.
because we're being televised and they can't hear you when you speak from there.
Richard Hugus again. Since you summarized what he and I said, I'd just like to make it clear, I'm opposed to the project. Don't want to see it happen. So I
Yeah,
have
we
lots
get
of
it, yeah.
reasons, and you've already seen those in my written comments.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we need a motion to send this on to the Cape Cod Commission for their review.
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and you see this in your packet here. Okay, Tom asked whether we can take the commission out of order, Chloe, from her presentation. So I need a motion to take this out of order.
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, moved in second to take the commission's report out of order. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Alrighty, if I may, Madam Chair?
Yes.
So, at our last meeting, we had a presentation, a slide presentation of the process, and including in that was a draft of the scope of work for the VLTA grant. So in that scope of work that was prepared, the staff has tweaked it up a little bit in looking at a couple of things. We wanted to make sure that when we look at, and this is essentially in line one, that the town of Falmouth seeks a qualified land use zoning and a professional team. We just wanted to add, the town of Falmouth seeks a qualified land use zoning and design professional. Because in addition to crafting your standard zoning under form-based code, there is an awful lot of design and work there. So we wanted to make sure we weren't closing the door to architectural sort of firms and design firms and things like that. We added in a maximum of 3 meetings. The original scope had anticipated a meeting. We wanted to make sure that the scope had a substantial number of meetings, kickoff meeting, presentation meetings, and then a feedback meeting for the work that had been done. And the original scope had a project for the budget not to exceed, and that line was blank. Originally, we were talking about a number under $50,000. $50,000 is a number that we encounter fairly regularly in these design things that has to do with the scope of the work that's done, as well as the procurement thresholds for those things. And looking at this and comparing it with some similar RFPs done by Arlington, Massachusetts, a town I'm somewhat familiar with due to the staff. They do very good work. It's very comparable to what they're looking at. So we think that the minor, the sort of tweaks to the scope, and make sure we got a design firm in there, making sure we've got sufficient meetings, and noting that that dollar amount is under $50,000, were those things that we had at a staff level proposed to incorporate into that scope. And I don't know if the board had anything else they wanted to add to that, but that's why we're here.
The board, have you reviewed it? Do you have any other changes you wish to see in here, any comments? Jim?
Well, I remember a number when we talked about this originally in the $80,000 range. And then why, I'm just wondering why this has been reduced. I thought we were talking about $80,000 for something like this.
Well, at one point, we were looking at trying to do a sort of an advanced visioning session. So the number we have for the scope that's been proposed is and I don't frankly remember the $80,000 number offhand and what that fully incorporated. I can go back and take a look at that, to look over that budget amount. The $50,000 amount is, like I said, we've seen this in a few different proposals comparable to this. Over $50,000, it trips another threshold for the bidding and procurement process. And frankly, not that I'm any kind of seer into the future, but we'd love to have a number that's fairly palatable to town meeting, since town meeting will be voting on this. We never want to be in a position where we have to come back and ask for more money, but we think for the scope that was proposed here, that $50,000 is a reasonable number for what we're looking at. But I'll clearly go back and look at what that $80,000 number was.
Okay. Chloe, do you have any further comments, or?
I
I don't at this time. I'm really just here to get any feedback that you guys have.
Okay.
so.
And are you okay with that 50,000 also? Do you? from
Yeah,
your-
I think from what I've seen so far that I am, but I will certainly also go back and continue to do some more research on that as well.
Okay, so we're good on this then?
Yes.
We've been sharing.
Paul?
Yeah, I just have a comment. I noticed there's no schedule in here, anticipated schedule. Is that gonna be left to the contractor, or are we gonna anticipate some sort of schedule for getting responses?
Well, we have
On the work
a
itself.
sort of a timetable of when the start date is very dependent upon town meeting funding and things like that. We would anticipate that we would do the bid process, the RFP process, to identify a contractor. So based on when that contractor is available, would sort of set the schedule for that. Obviously, you don't want to get somebody who is fabulous, but is booked until 2099. So it sort of depends the schedule on who the contractor is and when they can start, but we want to certainly have it, we're not going to give the latitude to say that, we can do this work in 2021. We want them, on the property ASAP.
Usually when you do an RFP, you're putting your schedule in
Yeah,
there.
correct. So this is a portion of the RFP. This is
Yeah.
sort of the scope of work. There's some additional boilerplate and some other qualifications that go in with that as well.
Jim?
We have a benchmark schedule that as long as it complies with that, I'm okay. We marked out all the benchmarks and timeframes to bring this forward, and it's in our presentations, and as long as it's hitting that, I'm good.
But that doesn't,
Very
but
Paul.
that doesn't require the contractor to meet that schedule. Just because we have one and
No,
he has a
I'm saying it
contractor to do
should.
something else.
I'm
it
agreeing
doesn't.
with you. I'm saying it
Okay.
should meet that schedule. I'm just saying
I think we have to incorporate that.
yes, that's my
Oh,
point.
absolutely.
I'm agreeing with you,
That would
Paul.
go into a full RFP.
Once.
Charlotte?
I am confused. Tom, when we talked this morning, just reviewing what's going to happen in the meeting, it was my understanding that the draft, which we didn't get a chance to see before the last meeting, that what we were looking for is someone to develop a full RFP. This sounds more like this is the RFP, because the scope of work and deliverables this year somewhat outlined, to craft and affirm the vision, evaluate the existing zoning. So are you expecting the result of this work to be a full RFP or to be all the work?
Well, this is, like I said, this is, will be inserted in the body of the full-blown RFP, but this is those portions that directly identify the work that needs to be done and how it needs to be done. Typically, an RFP is going to be about 20 pages with boilerplate in the town's front end about their requirements for non-collusion and all those sort of things. So this is sort of I want to say, I guess I'm going to say the creative part of the RFP to plug into the scope of work that's going to be done. So there'll be a sort of a front side and a back side on this, but for the most part, these are fully fleshed out, the task that we want that consultant who is retained to do for us.
And we are preparing to pay up to $50,000 for the work that's outlined in the RFP, not for the RFP.
That's correct.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Paula.
very much.
Okay, I move that we go back to the regular agenda.
Second?
All in favor? So, the applicant, it's a continuation, Nature's Remedy for a special permit application for a medical marijuana dispensary at 31 T-Ticket Highway, Warwick and Associates. And we have a letter in our file here from them asking for an extension through September 31st, which is interesting because September only has 30 days.
This is a special year.
Oh, it's a
Yeah.
special year,
There-
okay.
There's a lot of math that goes into this.
It all depends what you're smoking, I guess.
So I have talked with Justin Lundberg, who's the contact for this, and pointed out, we've continued this for 30 days at a pop to see if you guys are ready to go. And discussing this previously with the chair, I said, well, I think the board's inclination is to give you more than 30 days, since it's taken a while for you to work through your internal issues. He was fine with that. We are looking at, they still have some permitting to do with the state, as he tells me that the push for recreational marijuana has sort of taken over some of the state's capacity to review these things. And while 10 months ago they had an application in for their grow facility for medical marijuana, there are other things that have come out of the pipeline for recreational marijuana that kind of hopped over them. So they're pushing the Commonwealth to get back to their application that's in. So short part of the story is, if we continue them till October 22nd, essentially 2 months out, that's not going to create any issues for them, because they're still trying to get through the state.
John?
I was not here when they initially came in for their application. So a couple of questions. Are they purchasing this property or are they leasing this property?
It is a condominium office complex, so they would be purchasing that unit.
And what's the date on their purchase and sales agreement?
I do not know.
I just want to make sure that we're not continuing something and they don't have the right, they've lost their time frame in the purchase and sales agreement, or if they have an extension, if they did come to that deadline. Because this is like the third or fourth time that they've been here. I just want to make sure that they still have the right to purchase the property, if that's what they're doing.
When I
Agreement that says they have the right to
Yeah,
purchase the
that didn't
property.
come up in our conversation today, but they said they are moving forward with the owner, the current owner of the unit, as well as the condo association.
I understand that, but they must have presented you with a written document, a copy of their purchase and sales agreement, when they initially applied.
I don't know that I have that or not. I can check the file.
Okay, thank you.
I actually thought it was a lease,
That's what I thought.
so I'm not sure. But it doesn't really matter. John's point is well taken.
So Tom is making note of John's point. He will follow through on that. But in the meantime, we certainly can extend it to October 24th. That gives Tom time.
22nd.
We
22nd
can do
was it?
that, but if they're outside of their
Yeah, it
timeframe,
doesn't-
then we shouldn't be doing this anymore. That's my point.
No, I understand what you're saying,
And
but we
I'm
don't
not
have
saying
the
they
answer to
are,
that.
I don't know if they are
Right.
or not, but,
And we don't have the answer to that, and we're at drop dead now for their
sure,
latest extension, so.
I understand.
So we could make a motion
Mhm.
that if in fact all the paperwork for the PNS is in order, then we can vote this. But I think we should have that in there,
PNS or lease,
yes.
Mhm.
whatever they
So-
do there.
Make the motion with that caveat in there.
So I move that we accept the extension to October 22nd, 2019, with all the verifiable information of either a purchase and sale agreement or a lease.
Is there a
That
second?
includes these dates.
Mhm.
Second?
Any further discussion? Paul?
I'd just like to add one other thing. When we had this discussion before, we talked about a lot of things that we're required to look at for site review. And the attorney representing the condo association presented a number of issues that were problematic, to say the least. So I think the condo association has to be involved in this, as well as whether it's a lease to the individual owner or not. I think it's more complicated than that.
It is. So Tom will ferret all this information out
I
to see
think,
whether it's
I think
valid
the
or
motion
not.
covers that, but I just want to make that point.
Right. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
So we're going on to the College Light Opera Company. And you will recognize that we just got some information today, and some came in on Friday, so
We got three.
we've not had a whole lot of time, so there'll just be a
Okay.
presentation
So
tonight.
you got three that are on here, but plug in whatever you want.
the record, my name is Jeff Nickerson. I represent the applicant, the College Light Opera Company. Our first hearing was 2 weeks ago, and at that, the board asked for some more information. And I think I was overly ambitious on how quickly I could get it to you. So my main point today is to ask for another extension until your next hearing, which is September 10th. But I did want to just quickly go through some of the plans that you will be able to review, and that our neighbors will be able to review, because they're now in planning.
Do we have those plans in our packet that we're gonna review? I don't have them in mine.
I don't have them either.
If I may, the plans arrived, we got some on Friday, we got some today. And so in having this discussion with the applicant and the chair, if the plans come in late, that the board isn't able to sort of act on them and give them, some feedback, we would typically just refer them to the next available meeting. In this case, because there were a number of folks who were here, who lived in the neighborhood, who were anticipating hearing more about it at this meeting, some of which I understand are maybe, seasonal residents as well. We wanted to at least have the depictions and things like that to put together for the neighbors to see. And any substance conversation by the board would have to take place at our next meeting on September 10th, after we've had a chance to vet those, review those, and run them through engineering as well.
Okay?
Great, thank you. So this is a rendering of what the building's gonna look like from the street. You're probably all familiar with the inn, which is the big building that's on the site presently. That's over here on the left, and this is as you're at the driveway looking in. The board was also interested in a detailed lighting plan, which we have. There's a variety of colors on here which represent different kinds of lights. These blue dots will be these downlights in the front. The red lights are red dots are gonna be these lanterns. Green dots will be these lanterns, and yellow will be these little downward casting lights along the back. A couple other plans as well. So this is an updated landscaping plan. All of the trees are depicted. There's a key over on this side, so if you have any questions about what they are, it's easy to, well, it's not easy, but it's possible to check them out. This also shows some lighting, because I know that was a concern of the board. These light blue dots,
So we can see.
these light blue dots are all pathway lighting. And there are these blue dots, which represent the parking lot lighting. I'm trying. Oh, here we go. Sorry, Tom, do you know how to zoom in?
Yeah, hit Control plus a couple times, or Shift plus, and it'll zoom in for you.
Right on Chappaqua.
So this shows you a little bit better.
So just move the cursor to move the pan around the, there you go.
So this is a little bit easier to see. These are the blue dots that represent the low pathway lighting. And I've got an example of what those pathway lights look like.
Jeff, could you speak just a little louder?
Sure,
please?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And then again, there's a couple lights up here. But I know that was a concern of the board at the last hearing, and so we wanted to show that we've addressed that. Sure. So the parking lot lighting. And I've got another slide that will help. So the parking lot lighting is just 4 lanterns. And just tab this down. So these are what the lanterns would look like, or this is what our landscape architect would propose. So those would be the lanterns that would be in the parking lot. And these are the path lanterns. So you see they're much lower, they provide light, so when people are walking around, they don't fall over, like some people do at planning hearings. But, you know, it's all downward casting light. And in terms of the parking lot, the square represents the parking field. Each of these red dots is a light, and this shows that the light is largely contained within the parking lot area. It's not spilling out into the street.
What do those numbers represent in that graph you're showing us?
I believe it's the intensity of the light.
Is it lumens? What's the math? What is it?
I do not know.
We should know what we're looking at.
Yep, certainly. And so those are the plans that were submitted recently. And so we would ask for a continuance just so that we can give you an opportunity to look at them, let our neighbors look at them, ask any questions, and provide as much information as we can in advance of the next hearing.
Does the board have any questions? I know we haven't had a chance to look at this yet.
Next time.
Okay, and I would recommend that people who are interested go into the planning office to take a look at the plans. If you have questions, hopefully our staff can answer them, too. Charlotte?
I'd just like to make a comment because I won't be here at the next meeting. Paul and I believe Bob, I don't know who else, went over to take a look around the site. And it happened that the property manager was there. His name was Mark.
Yep.
And showed us all the way around. The particular concern that I had at the time that I went there dealt with how visible the parking area would be from the street. Because now, when you drive along that road, you're not aware of it at all. And I wanted to know if it were going to change. He assured us that there was no change at all planned for any of the things that are between the parking area and the street. There's stone wall in there, there might be a double row of it, there are a lot of full-grown trees, there's a lot of overgrown vines, it looks like, a lot of shrubbery there. There's no plan to touch it. There's no budget to touch it, there's no plan to touch it. That's what we were assured.
Okay.
And that was important to me when I was in there. The other point that was made, when we first started walking around the property, it's a big property, it's over 6 acres. It's quite low-lying, but it's not swampy in any kind of way. It goes right over to the water. The cottages are over by the water. Between the existing building and those cottages, there's a beautiful big tree, and they couldn't save the tree. They tried very hard to site the big part of the new building in a way that they wouldn't lose that tree, but it wasn't possible to do. But the new building itself is set back quite a distance from the street, so that if you go back to that elevation that we had asked for, that would show what's it like from the street, looking at the existing inn, how much of that new building are you going to see? You are going to see the new building, and it's a good-looking building, but a lot of it is covered by the inn, but mostly it's retreats away from the street, and that really diminishes the amount that you're aware of it. So I thought, well, the streetscape isn't changing much.
No.
That was my overall impression.
And the other reasoning for the design was to make it conform to the design of the building as if it was a carriage house that would have normally occurred at that time period.
Okay, now, do you
Can I
all?
pause quickly?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Same concern about dark skies, changing the character of the neighborhood by lighting it up. It looks like there's a good attempt, but I'd actually like to see them document what it is before and what it is after and ensure that it's not going to increase that.
Well, the lighting information is in this package.
Right,
so-
but they could document what it looks like now and at the end prove that it isn't.
Good.
The lumens, well, each thing they showed was a covered light.
I saw them all.
Yeah.
I saw what they sent out. They haven't provided it tonight,
And yet,
but I did read
he
it.
went by it quickly. It looked to me as if they'd planned for perimeter light all the way around, everything. So there's
As
quite
long as
a,
it works.
right. No, I mean, that's a lot of lighting to add.
Right, I'm worried about the loom in the sky, being a neighbor, trying to look up at the stars and not seeing anything.
Yeah,
Because your neighbor has so many bright lights that reflect off and go up. It's happening all over our town, and it does change the neighborhood character.
so when you measure that by lumens? What's a good
I use the term loom. When I was a sailor and going down, you could see different cities, and you go by different cities, and they light up the whole sky.
Right.
Well, Quistit lights up the whole sky. I just hope this doesn't light up Chappaquiddick Beach
Right.
and make their sky, because I like to go out there at night and look at stars.
Not a concern in North Korea.
Well, this isn't North Korea.
Thanks for that, Bob.
It's very developable.
Yes.
So if I may?
Yes.
Just to shed a little light on that one plan, lighting plan. Those numbers on the plan, those decimal numbers are a metric for, and I looked this up.
Ooh.
I didn't know this. As a metric for light loss factors. So when that light goes onto the ground, it factors how much that light tailors off as it gets to the edge. So you might call it a lumen to tell you what the brightness of the light is. The light loss factor is what is the effect of the light on the ground as it travels away from that lantern, down to a point where it's essentially about zero at the property lines.
Thank you, Tom. Now, is there any comment that any of you wish to make at this point? And if so, please come up.
We thank you for this opportunity, we
Could I
really
have
do.
your name?
Alma Marians, and I'm an abutter to the College Light Opera. First, I'd like to say that we have always enjoyed the College Light Opera as our neighbor, and we welcome these talented students every year. We have certain concerns about this building. Someone else can talk about the bulk of the building, but I would like to talk about the landscaping. If you could put, oh, you took it away? If you notice on the landscaping plan, there's two areas of existing landscaping that's going to stay. And then the third area is being destroyed, because that's where the meadow grass is going to be for the leaching field. And they have some trees that they call screening trees there. But they are not leaving all of the current growth along the street. They're taking some of it down. Our other concern is, although they may be leaving it, we all know what happens when construction starts. And then they end up taking it down anyway. Now, the current inn is pretty large, but it is totally covered by this existing growth. And once this existing growth is destroyed, which chances are it will be, that is a very, very large bulk of a building. So we are very concerned about how to keep, so that's coming down over there and the meadow is going to push to the end, and now they've put in some trees. I don't know what they mean by screening trees. This is coming down, this is staying, and this is staying, but you can just imagine when the construction starts here that they're going to destroy that. And so that whole facade will be exposed. That's one of our concerns. The other concern is that they have 43 parking spaces. Now, when they have fundraising events and alumni events and what other concerts or whatever else they want to have there, what is going to happen when there are more than 43 cars? Where are those cars going to park? They're going to probably park either along Old Dock Road or along Chappaqua. Those are very narrow streets. They can't tolerate, it wouldn't be safe to have all those cars there. So that's another concern of ours. In terms of the lighting, there are no lights now. There are no lights now. So that this would be a lot of light into this very quiet, dark neighborhood. Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
I just want to first say, yes, we love Clock
And
as a
please give us your
neighborhood.
name.
My name's Caroline Constant. I live at 544 West Falmouth Highway, so I'm not an abutter, but I am an architect, and I'm concerned that the way that the building kind of looks like another big house right next to the existing big house seems very out of character with the neighborhood, and in fact makes it bulkier. And I don't know if you read Doug and Kristen Shearer's letter that they sent today, where they were also talking about the bulk of the building, the height exceeding the height limit. the current height limit, et cetera. And I think that these questions of bulk, that basically, if it looked like a barn, they call it a barn. I don't mean stylistically exactly like a barn, but more like a shed, that it wouldn't be as obtrusive as part of the kind of complex of buildings that constitutes Clock. I think that the way that it's kind of all broken up and trying to look, well, someone here said like a carriage house. It doesn't look like any carriage house I've ever seen, but I think that actually makes it more intrusive on the neighborhood and more out of character with the neighborhood. So that's what concerns me. Thank you.
May I kind of interpret what you're saying, if I'm understanding it
Yes,
correctly?
sure.
The way I'm understanding it is when you say it would be better if it looked more like a shed than a house, it's looking fairly ornate to have the same style as the main house.
Right, it's trying to kind of mimic the main house.
And you would say make it plainer so that it looks more like a barn or a shed. Is that
Yeah.
the right interpretation of what you
Basically,
said?
yes.
Thank you.
I mean, I think it would be less intrusive.
Okay.
I don't think it has to be the same materials as the existing house. I mean, I'm not trying to just express my opinion, but more talk about the issue of bulk, which is certainly your purview.
Mhm. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else who wishes to say something?
Hi, I'm Susan Silby. I'm also an abutter, and I too want to express my appreciation that you have given us this time today to talk to us. I will, however, try to show up at the next one to hear more details. I'm a little confused, and I really, like one of the earlier speakers about the Hui, really as a resident, it's very hard to understand the process, what's happening here, because I don't understand where the permissions come and what happens at what time, and I need your advice, because we don't exactly know where we can have an effect on what is going to fall down upon us, it seems. The loss of that tree that you noticed is extraordinary tree. It is a giant beech tree that takes hundreds of years to grow, just as an example. And the loss of the buffer along Chappaquoit Road, that's going to transform the neighborhood. And as the previous speaker said, they're not going to protect that unless somebody requires that protections be put up before the construction begins, so that all that growth is not destroyed by the trucks. And the drawings do suggest that they are going to take at least half of what's on the street they plan to take off. So I'm a little confused, because sometimes we're told one thing they're not going to take down, as you said, but then the drawing says another thing. And these pictures of the size, the bulk of the building are not quite accurate, because they're not showing you how tall those buildings are, because they've got the perspective that they're back another 20 feet. Is this going to be higher than the existing building with that cupola on top? That violates Falmouth's restrictions on height.
Cupolas don't count.
It's not going to violate it?
They're considered decorative.
Yeah.
That's what Bob was
Yeah.
just.
Cupolas don't count.
This is not just for a little windmill, this is a long,
Yeah.
and that doesn't count?
It's to the ridge, the top
To
of
the
the
ridge line, yeah. Widows walks, mechanical equipments, there's a whole, but it may be proposed elevations of what it's gonna look like from the street before and after, when we have the hearing, would be helpful for the public to understand, so they could take this into consideration. What you would see when they're finished from Chappaquoit Road, looking in from a couple of
Seeing
different angles.
both buildings,
Both
whether
buildings.
this new one is going to be taller than the old one.
I'm suggesting that probably 3 or 4 locations along Chappaquoit Road, they show this is what it's gonna look like when we finish.
Oh, that's very helpful. That's really very
That's-
helpful.
Now, our purview here is site plan review, so we have to do with landscaping.
But we also get to talk about the box size. Okay, one of the things that this is a a charitable organization. The Dover Amendment lets them change the use whatever they want. However, the size of the building is something we still control. Size and height are still part of our control. What they do inside, they're free to do it because they're a nonprofit where they can do whatever they want. But I believe that in fact, if you remember, the people in Woods Hole didn't want to go historic because they were really concerned we could limit the height and size of the building.
Tom, these people are concerned about who controls what the process is. Could you, I know because it's near the wetlands, the Conservation Commission has something to say about it, the building department would have something to say about it, who else, and in what order?
Yes, so true, this is a nonprofit for an educational purpose, and under the Dover Amendment, they are subject to reasonable regulations regarding bulk height setback and parking. So it is a very limited review that the town is allowed. They have been to the Conservation Commission. I believe they are done with the Conservation Commission. They started there to identify the constraints for the property there. So the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board, and then it goes to the building inspector or the building commissioner to issue site plans based on those.
Does that help a little bit with your understanding?
I appreciate that. One of my confusions is how the plans don't look the same maybe at each of these hearings, because I was at the one at Conservation, and here we've been given a picture up here which is not what a member of the board was told, so I'm a little confused about how the process is sort of managed to make sure that everybody gets all the same information.
Honesty of presentation.
What?
Honesty of presentation.
I didn't
if you wanna
say
call
that,
it
you
that,
said.
that everybody sees the same thing.
That'd be nice. That'd be nice.
Comment on that. At the last hearing, this board had asked for an additional rendering so that we would be able to see from a street view of the existing inn and the proposed rehearsal hall together. And that was given to us tonight, but we went by it very quickly. And maybe if we were to look at it again, that would be helpful, because it shows the relationship of the bulk of the two buildings together.
So if I may, in our conversations when the plans came in, and I talked about bringing this forward, even though the board hadn't had an opportunity to review the plans, so they didn't come in by Thursday, as the deadline is. In talking to Jeff Nickerson, counsel for College Light Opera, I said, we talked about should he bring the architect and the engineers tonight. And I said, well, frankly, it seems to me like a waste of those folks' time if the board hasn't reviewed that. So I suggested at the meeting on the 10th that they bring their full entourage of engineers, designers, and things like that to be able to vet those particular questions for you. But my concern was neighbors are expecting to hear something today. We don't have a contact list for all those folks to say, we don't really have a whole lot of stuff to do, but I wanted to make sure that this information was out there publicly as soon as we could get it out there.
I think the only drawing that would show the bulk of the new building in relationship to the old one is a facade drawing, a measured facade drawing, because a perspective distorts, and that perspective doesn't show the existing building, it shows a corner of it, but it really doesn't show it, and then it puts a tree in the joint between them when they're really overlapping. There's all kinds of tricks in perspective drawing, which I understand well, but an elevation of the two buildings side by side, that will give you a sense of the relative bulk of this building and that building, and I think that's crucial for your consideration.
Thank you.
So, is there a requirement that we have been given notice about each of these hearings as abutters? Who's responsible for that?
The requirement is you're notified for the opening of the hearing.
Oh, we haven't had a hearing yet?
Well, that was the abutters notice you got for the meeting we had 2 weeks ago. So you.
I'm sorry. I beg to say, did you get a registered letter or something? I mean, I didn't get a notice. I have not got a notice except from the conservation hearing from McGrath. He sent out a notice as the engineer. That's the only notice I have received as an abutter for 28 years.
Right, well, we'll take a look at the abutters list and see who sent things out, and if there wasn't, if they didn't go to everyone, we'll take a look, and if we need to send a second notice out, we will, but I'm under the impression that, the meeting was duly noted and, notice the abutters.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all of you. And now Mr. Nickerson has asked for an extension to October 10th. So,
Nope.
October 22nd, I thought.
September, I'm sorry, I wrote it wrong. Yes, please.
The only thing I wanted to say, which I noticed tonight more so than any other time, I'm sorry,
State your name.
Kathleen Leone Sealy, I'm in a butter at 17 Chappaquay Road, is we keep talking about 6 acres, and 6 acres sounds like a lot of land. But when you look at this piece of property, it is a very sensitive and fragile piece of property with how it is situated with the harbor and the pond. And I wondered tonight, what is the size of that pond and the area around that pond within that 6 acres? It's really not 6 acres when you start to carve off the areas that are really very fragile and we need to take into consideration. So when we talk about the bulk and we talk about the size of the buildings, we're not talking about 6 acres. What is the actual usable land in this property? That's really what struck me tonight when you see that plan and you see how much of the pond is part of that property.
Thank you. Okay, so, need a motion to continue to September 10th.
I
Per
move that we
request of
continue
the
this to continue to September 10th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for coming.
Any comments?
Thank you.
Okay. Next on our agenda is planning board discussion, 797 Main Street LLC. We have the reciprocal easement agreement, and there have been a couple of changes made, or one change anyway made in it.
Yes, in fact, the reciprocal agreement has had a wholesale change to it. Neither Mr. Duffy nor I could fully follow the agreement, so we asked him to clarify a few things, which they did to council's satisfaction and my satisfaction, that there are 9 parking spaces that are reserved for the use of the bottom floor of 797 Main. The one concern that council had in that agreement in paragraph 10 noted that this agreement, if it ceases based on a lack of agreement between the owners. So the shorthand is, the folks at 797 are going to be taking care of 815 Main's property through these shared agreements. And if they don't take care of the property, they don't pave things, they don't clean things, they don't move the dumpster, they do all those things that they've agreed to, and they can't sort it out by, notifying folks, you have to fix your stuff, you have to do this, then they could essentially abolish the agreement and say, we're enough with you, you're a bad neighbor, you're not taking care of your part of the agreement. Then we can abolish the agreement, which leaves the folks at 797 on a lurch, but that's what our bylaw says, that there's some longstanding agreement to that. So the thing that we had asked to be included in that, if for some reason that paragraph 10 is exercised, that any breach or default of this agreement by 797 and its successors and assigns, which continues for more than 10 days, they'll send a written notice, as I pointed out before. But we just want to make sure that it's not just the registry of deeds is notified of the ending of the easement agreement, that the town is notified as well. So if at some point they don't have the parking that's available, someone's gonna have to take some action and say, you can't occupy the first floor of this building anymore because the agreement is dissolved and you have to come up with 9 parking spaces or shorten your, or make the first floor considerably smaller. So that was the one thing that we wanted to make sure that we were aware of any breakdown in the agreement, that we would know and could take whatever sort of enforcement action necessary. Other than that, council was fine with the language in the agreement, the reciprocal agreement for both the parking spaces they're gonna share and the access this will provide across the back of 797 for hogs and dogs. And I said it right this time, I think. Hogs and dogs, you can't get to the back of the property because basically their buildings and plantings take up the entire width of their property. So there'll be an easement in there to allow the folks from one side of the property to get the other side of the property in exchange for giving up Cycle Avenue, which is that current access for parking. So we've got the agreement in place. Council is fine with that. They've made the changes that we've requested. And we've notified and noted that in the draft decision as well. From my perspective, if the board is comfortable with that, that they could vote the agreement tonight, the decision tonight. I unfortunately do not have that in your packets. I didn't get a chance to hit the print key on that. And because I carry a computer with me, I couldn't quite get all the way upstairs and print 7 copies of it. So if the board is comfortable with where we're at right now, I will read the draft for the board's consideration.
Is the board comfortable with where we are now? With Frank having weighed in on this?
I'm comfortable with it, but what bothers me is I met with Tom this afternoon at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and this was still not decided. And here we are now, it's been decided by town council. I really would rather just have it in front of me and vote it properly. That's how I feel about it.
I always feel that way too, John, so.
I just want to be clear, the simple way that Tom just said is they lose their occupancy permit if this agreement fails, which means they can't occupy the building. Let's be clear about that. I kind of think that's what he said, but that's what I think it should be. So they have to keep the agreement or they don't operate the first floor, period.
Yeah.
Really clear about that.
That's putting it in plain English, not legalese.
Lose no occupancy permit, period.
So,
Under any circumstances.
I feel the same way you do, John. Every time we vote something without it written down in front of us.
I feel like I'm just winging it here. And
Yeah.
This is pretty complex. We spent a lot of time on this.
Absolutely.
It's been going on forever.
Okay, Bob, you feel the same or no?
Yeah, I'd like to have it in front of me.
Jim's nodding.
Yep.
Charlotte, Paul, get it in front of us,
September 10th.
okay?
September 10th.
Okay, so decision September 10th. Annual fall town meeting articles,
If I may.
please, yes.
I shared with you some of the draft language for our town meeting articles. These will have hearings. We'll be discussing them at that point in the hearing process. One of the things that we had talked about in the last meeting was the number of floors for business redevelopment. And at that point, I suggested that we clarify the language that said the top floor is a half story, so the maximum height in business redevelopment is 2.5 stories. A couple members of the board thought, well, maybe we want to have some flexibility with that. So in discussing this with a member of the board and the chairman, I suggested that language might say something to the effect of, and let me get to that. So that language would say something to the effect of the maximum building height, 2.5 stories, not to exceed 35 feet. The upper half story may be expanded by special permit of the planning board in conjunction with the established design guidelines for large-scale development. So that gives the planning board the option to say, in this particular case, based on how your building is designed, we would grant you a special permit to exceed that half story on the upper floor. I looked at a couple different things. When in our accessory housing bylaw, we equate how much the top floor you calculate. If it's a gambrel, it's 0.9 of a floor. If we do a cape, it's 0.5. Rather than put a number in there that might be 0.9, I think if you had 2.9 stories as a maximum, we would see gambrels early and often for everything that we design. Bob had mentioned that a mansard roof also is a very nice look. It's got, I think it was Bob. Also provides a fair amount of square footage. So in looking at what the design is, and what the actual square footage of that design takes on the top floor, I think through a special permit by the planning board, we would be able to allow some creativity in the business redevelopment district, and also maintain some control over exactly how that comes out. So that's what I'm proposing for that language that we'll be hearing, probably end of September, 24th hearing, depends on, we're waiting to see what else we get in from the clerk. The warrant closes on the 3rd, so we'll have a full idea of all the zoning bylaws we may have to vet.
Bob?
Now, this is just for business redevelopment.
That's correct.
Are we also considering the other business districts that?
No, because our bylaw, and I put that in the bottom of my memo, our bylaw deals with every other height specifically, except in business redevelopment.
Right.
It
But
says,
go ahead.
yeah, for agricultural uses, a maximum height of 50 feet. In public use districts, a maximum height not, 3 stories not to exceed 50 feet except for municipal purposes. Light industrial B and C district, maximum building height shall be 40 feet, number of stories per 3. So in each of these instances, we have an example set out where the property can exceed 2.5 stories, 35 feet, except for in business redevelopment. And that was the nature of this article, just to clarify what that height in stories was in business redevelopment.
John?
So, my preference, this is business redevelopment, so we're trying to encourage more business. I would much prefer that it read maximum building height 35 feet, 3 stories. I don't see the reason for 2.5 stories. We're trying to do, encourage development, trying to encourage residential use above stores, above offices, and I would much prefer to, I don't know why it's 2.5 stories. I mean, I just don't understand that, so I much prefer just be 3. It's 3 stories in public use. You just read it, 3 stories in public use. So that's my preference.
Carla?
It's not my preference. 2.5 stories is my preference, and I don't like the additional language that's been proposed because I think it could really be, turn out to be a standard rather than an exceptional kind of a special permit situation. I think the 2.5 stories is there to make sure that we don't have the business redevelopment areas, which are right here along our main streets, turn into flat-top buildings all along the way. It'd just be ugly. It's against the character, the guidelines that we're trying to adopt that maintain the colonial character and traditional character of the town. I think that's why it's 2.5 stories, not 3-story buildings, not what we're looking for.
Jim?
I think roof lines are really, really important, and one of the things I found out studying our business redevelopment works really good on a small lot. And if you notice, when they came to do the building before, I forget the exact address, but next to Hogs and Dogs, when we saw the 3-story building, we all thought it was way too massive. When they reduced it to 2.5, all of a sudden it started looking good. That's because it's a very small lot and it does work. But on a giant lot, where you have, sometimes it does work. So I like the idea of it being a special permit to allow us to have the difference between for small lots and big lots. I agree with what John wants to say. I want to get it up as high. But if we do that, that means all those 3 lots are just boom, 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 boom down the road. And that's bad. I think when I look, that makes Falmouth special and Cape Cod is the difference between the roof lines, the windows, and all those things, and I'd like to see the changes from them and not have them all be exactly the same. And a small lot, and that's what we have in most of our redevelopment, is all small lots. And if we do that, we'd all have the same size and looking exactly the same, and we wouldn't have been able to pare them back as we did, which I thought was a great improvement that we did. So I think we need to have the ability to decide whether that fits on the lot because of its size and the abutters.
But we're going to have big lots going down Davis Straits. You've already pointed out how few
It works out
owners there
better.
are.
I think on some of the bigger lots, it's not a problem, because what we get, on Davis Straits, we plan to do form-based code and have variations. You can do this, we have to have variations.
And the taller buildings would be more towards the
The
center.
taller buildings will be programmed in. And I think on some of the buildings, some of the sites we've seen in the past, you know, the gambrel roofs work, but we don't want gambrels everywhere, you know what I mean? So I think we gotta have the ability to have it be different.
I'd like to also point out that there are instances where we might want a flat top roof if they propose a rooftop garden.
It might work.
It might be very nice.
It might work, but we need to be able to decide that on a case-by-case basis.
Tom?
So the purposes for advertisement, I tried to craft something that was fairly broad and could be made smaller, because typically at town meeting, you can reduce the scope of something, but you can't expand the scope of something. So if we said 2.5 stories and someone said, I want 3, someone could say, well, I didn't know that was gonna be voted at town meeting. So I tried to have something, and like I said, we're gonna be talking about this in a couple weeks during the course of the hearing. But I just wanted to sort of set the table with as broad of sort of language as we could. So if we have to pare something back during the hearing, we are making things smaller rather than larger.
I think having the 2.5 stories gives us more discretion when it comes to the design of the building.
And we have the special permitting
And we have the
authority.
special permit
And that
authority.
gives us some control
Mhm.
over this.
Yeah.
You could have special permit if it's 3 stories also.
Yeah, if it's in business redevelopment and we think it looks right, and it's 3 stories, it could be okay.
So you have the same control, just this would allow the applicant to have 3 floors instead of 2.5.
No, if it's by right, they can do it automatically.
No, but if it's
But if
3
it's 3
stories with a special permit.
That's what I'm saying. We're saying the same thing, John.
Well, they're saying 2.5 stories, I'm saying 3
I'm
stories.
saying 2.5 or 3 with a special permit is what I'm
Right.
saying.
That's the
So it'll say
translation.
2.5 or 3?
Well,
No, but you can get
we
3
could
with
change
a
it up to,
special
I
permit.
don't exactly like 3 makes flat top, but a gambrel is 90%. I just like, that's okay. I think they should propose a design, and we get to decide on the design whether we like it or not. And if it's a flat story roof, we can say we don't like it. Maybe it should be a gambrel, or maybe it should be 2.5. And those are what we do in design review. But if we just say they could do 3, we're just gonna get nothing but big boxes all the way down.
But if you
Well-
say just 2.5, then you're limiting it.
No, you're
That's
not,
the point.
I'm
because they
saying
can
a special
expand.
permit up to, could be 3 stories,
Yeah,
So
the
you
upper
want
half
that
story
language in
may
there.
be expanded by
Yeah.
a special
by a
permit.
special permit,
Up to 3 stories.
a special permit, but not a by right 3-story. That's the difference between,
I can appreciate that.
that's the only difference between
The only
you and I.
difference.
I don't know why you would create that possibility of having flat top 3 stories, because they can't make it, if it's 3 stories, they can't put a pitched roof on it, it makes it too tall. So you're saying flat top buildings, hey, we'll consider it, and
Maybe we will,
I
in
won't.
certain instances. That's fine.
Well, there might be one where it fits. Or the gambrels actually look pretty good in some of the buildings and on a big lot with its spacious and gambrels, they look like they fit.
There-
If
there
they
ha-
turn
Run
different
right in the
angles to the
corner
roof.
here.
There has to be some buildings on Main Street that have flats.
Yeah,
roofs to
sure.
them.
yes.
Some of them do, yeah, they,
Some of them do, and is that a good idea? Do you want more of that? And I have yet to see a gambrel that looked good. Could you give me an example?
I was not able to comment on the ones that I had to recuse myself, so I won't comment on them.
Well, I would also point out we're going for a zoning bylaw amendment, and it's town meeting that has the ultimate authority as to whether this
Sure.
passes or not.
Well, it started out that the current bylaw is 35 feet, period. And what we proposed to add was the 2.5 stories. Now we're trying to change this entirely to make it a 3-story thing, which we didn't have before.
No, we're not.
By special permit.
By
Yeah, we are.
special permit.
By
we could do
special
it.
permit.
I think this gives us some control.
It does.
And I think then when people go and look at this, 2.5 stories not to exceed 35 feet, that sort of says it. And then if you want to do something with that top floor, you have to come back for a special permit.
Yeah.
And I think that gives more control. My own personal feeling in terms of flat roofs, you can have a rain garden, you can do all sorts of things that could be very unique and very attractive. And the McCormick Building, where I lived, we had a rain garden when they redid that whole building and made it, I think, silver lead, with a very, very old building. And they flattened out an area and made a wonderful roof garden up there.
Well, and if a half story is only 50% of the second story, you might want to go 75% of
Right.
that. as
Or
opposed
that's
to-
the math, that's what I wanted to get at.
Right.
The half
Exactly.
story, the way it works, 2.5 stories, you have, just for simple math, 1,000 square feet in the first floor, 1,000 square feet in the second, you're only allowed 500 on the third. I'm saying you might want to have 750 on the third.
Yeah.
Or 800, or some variation, but that's what we get to decide by how it looks from the outside. I'm not saying give them 3 stories, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. No, I'm just
I
saying,
understand that, you're just opening the door to it. You're not saying you can have it, you're saying come and ask us for it, and you're saying that this board, or whoever the board is at the time, can decide what they want. That's what you're saying.
because I think.
So you're opening a door.
Well, I think what we're gonna do in form-based code in some of those areas that we're gonna designate, you could put 3 stories. In fact, we might even say 4 stories in some of those areas because we think it fits. And I think on our main roads, there is a place, I'm not saying automatic.
Well, when we have those controls in place and those understandings in place, because we've got the pictures that go with form-based code, that's different. Right now, we don't have that.
We will have design guidelines in place, because we're having this other hearing on the other channel about adopting our design standards. So to that point, it could be larger than 2.5 stories if it looks like something in our design standards. So you could get more than 2.5 stories by a special permit of the planning board if it looks like something that's in our design standards. So we are able to control that through the zoning and through design both. So as we move forward and adopt our design standards, which I think we'll have well buttoned up by November 13th, we'll be in a position to say 2.5 stories if it looks like this.
I'm not saying flat roof, but a colonial building with 2 shed dormers and dog houses on it is gonna have almost 80% or 90% of the second floor, but it could look good in the right location. I don't like a perfectly flat roof, just box, box, box. I like changes in roof lines. Take a look at, you go down where we've had to fight, where aesthetics has come in, and I think we've dealt with it as a town. If you go down to Surf Drive looking at residential properties, and now they're jammed up because they're losing 15 feet on the bottom.
Right.
They've now developed these little turrets and little changes in roof lines. They're not flat roofs, they've got some dimension and look, and they actually look okay. I mean, I think if it's in our design review and we get to approve it, I think it's okay. I'd be fine to say no flat roofs. I don't really like flat, I like to have the detail of the roof, but what I wanna do is to have them more than just 50% of the second floor. That really is inhibiting the use of the space. So I'm trying to do both, and it's hard.
It is hard, but I think we're repeating ourselves, so if we want to move
So-
on.
Well, doesn't it say right now up to 35 feet?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But the 2.5 stories limits you, the
But-
third floor is only
But it says
50% of the
Up to
second.
35 feet, it doesn't say special permit.
Right.
So what if we just added the word special permit?
It's here.
I
And
agree,
without 2.5 or 3 stories,
I agree.
Oh, I like the 2.5.
okay?
So you'd have maximum building height, 35 feet.
Which is what it is right now,
Right.
but it would
Upper
require a special permit.
story.
Anything more than that, not spelling out what it is by a special permit.
That makes it really foggy. It's clearer the way it's
Yeah.
written here than it is by taking that out.
Yeah.
And it also says, but you can do better because we're getting these planning guidelines in place
Right.
too.
Because
We've
we
never had the capacity to
remember
do
we
this
ran
kind of
into
thing.
this because the 2.5 stories wasn't written into the business
Yeah.
redevelop. So I think that's the main impetus for putting this in there.
Is put in the 2.5 stories.
Putting in the 2.5 stories, because we were approached about, it doesn't say 2.5
Right.
stories, but it says 35 feet, so I can therefore put
You can do
a
whatever we
3-story
want.
building and have 100% occupancy on all 3 floors.
Right.
So that's,
The ones we've seen didn't go 100, they were 80 or 90. I'm
Right.
just saying there's more than 50 is
Yeah.
what I think more than, there's gotta be some room between 50 and 100. There's gotta
Yeah.
be a number that works.
yeah. Yeah, because like you said, you could have a building with a shed dormer.
Yeah.
But-
Which,
Are we recommending these to the warrant?
well, it's whether we had a special permit or limit it to 2.5. That's really the question, right?
No, I can see I'm in the minority.
Do we take a vote on this tonight to recommend it
Well,
to
I
the
think
warrant?
that we're probably a little out of order to take a vote on it. I just kind of wanted to bring this to your attention.
Okay,
to
that's what I thought. It
advertise
was a
because
little
we're
earlier.
having a hearing where we're going to debate it more than we did tonight,
Right,
if that's possible.
but we always recommend it to the warrant
Yeah.
and then we come back. It's all
But like I said, my
backwards.
point, I wanted a broad language that would be easy enough to move around without, locking us into something in particular.
For me, that makes this most secure is a 35-foot limit. So no matter what, if somebody comes back for a special permit to enlarge the third floor, whatever, for me, aesthetically, the 35 feet's the most important thing.
And that doesn't change, because that's always said 35.
Exactly. So I'm good with this.
How do you slice 35?
We're just talking the shape of the third floor.
Right.
We are, right.
Just the shape of it, and the outline of the roof.
And we have told people we don't like what they're showing us, and they've gone back and changed it.
Yes, they
Right.
have.
Yep. They want it.
If
Okay,
they
so
want it.
we're good to fly with this right now.
Yep.
Okay. Tom, can we go back to the first one, because I think town meeting is going to want, instead of an appropriate sum of money, or, excuse me, to appropriate a sum of money, they like to have a number attached to it.
49.9 is what's in our
The RFP thing.
scope for form-based code.
Okay, so, but I mean, I think it's gonna have to be put in here as part of the article, okay? And we're okay with that? Okay,
Of 49.
49.9.
I will confer with,
Under 50,000.
to Jim's point, I will go back and look at that $80,000 number, that come close to looking at the same thing, and we have to make any adjustments on that, but I think the sweet spot from the folks I've talked to is that 49.9 number.
Okay. Charlotte?
What became of Jim's idea about the, over there in the light industrial C-zone for the ground-mounted solar?
That's not ours.
No, EDIC's gonna do that?
Yes.
Yeah, I can explain that real
Go ahead.
quickly,
Yeah.
just to simplify things. Having discussed it with Tom and having me recommend as a planning board member was problematic, so I was reminded that the EDIC now has an executive director, and I've met with him, and I turned the whole job over to him, and he's doing the whole thing, so I'm not gonna be involved in it at all. It's now a petitioner's article. I handed the paperwork over to him. He's filed it with the selectmen. That goes to the selectmen's office. They pay their $200, and they get their 10 signatures, and they apply, and I don't sit on that board, and they do it totally independent. So all I have to do is recuse myself when it comes to this board, and I'm not in conflict of interest.
Great.
So it's a nice, smooth way to handle it.
To do it and get it done.
Still gets it done. In fact, they've already applied. The next day, I turned the paperwork, I met I should remember his name, but I don't, anyways, Mike, DiBiase? DiGiano. So I've turned it over to Mike, and he's already told me he's already applied, and he's going through the selectman's office, and so we don't have to do it. It's gonna be a petitioner's article.
Great, okay, yeah.
Okay, so the third one on here is to remove from
Parking lot.
the parking bylaws, the diagrams. And then put the statement in here, the dimensions for parking area are contained within the design guidelines for large-scale development. So that throws even more into those design guidelines. It throws more control into there, so we have flexibility. Were there any objections to that?
No.
Okay.
Not an objection, but having had to deal with this, with recommending to clients in my business has been very, very difficult, especially on a small lot, how you deal with this and what it takes. I'd like to see it have more because it should fit the lot. And
So that's
this
what
is an
this
immovable
does.
object that you put in, and you can't, it has to do this or it doesn't work.
And that's what this change does.
Right, now
It
they
says
could
we
cut this
can-
in half, move it in different places, it works better, I think, to have the flexibility.
So are we good to go with that for the warrant?
Yes.
Okay. So that takes care of the town meeting articles. Now, the joint planning board, Board of Selectmen meeting topics. You probably all have seen the stream of emails. And it's not a joint meeting. Sorry, folks. Our charter says that there will be 2 joint meetings of the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board per year, solely with them, to deal with issues of long-term planning. We haven't had one of those in a long time. I am not objecting to the kinds of meetings we've had where you've got 8 different boards coming in. But it totally undermines the meaning that was put into that original charter by having these two groups meet together, period. And the best ones we have had are the ones that occur on a Saturday morning. We've had meetings before, I don't know whether any of you were on the board when this happened, that essentially what's gonna happen here is, well, they had us sitting out in the hall, twiddling our thumbs while they went on with their regular agenda before they invited us in. And we were ready to walk out on that. This was many years ago. I really, really strongly object to this particular format. I don't know whether any of the others of you have this problem with it or not. I don't know. But if we have to deal with the wastewater management committee, okay, we've got wastewater management under a long-term plan. But there's a particular issue that we would be dealing with there. Now you go on to the rest of their meeting. Forget it. None of our stuff comes up because they have to decide on the warrant articles that night. That's it. That's what the email said. So I am saying this is not the joint meeting as called for in the charter.
That's right. I agree with you,
I totally agree with Pat. I think it dilutes our position,
totally.
and it just makes it so other boards try to chime in all the time, and they take half or three-quarters of it, and it's not what's intended by the charter. I think it should, I understand that the selectmen and Julian have their issues, and they're trying to pack as much as they can in, but they're taking away from us when they do it. And I think the charter says we get to have our joint meeting. I think we should hold out for it.
I'm not even talking about taking away from us necessarily. I'm talking about undermining the charter requirements for long-term planning for the town.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. A
Me too.
joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board is just that.
Period,
Yeah, period.
Done.
period.
So I think we should thank them profusely and say, but no. Thank you, but that's not what this says.
I mean, you're undermining the charter, for heaven's sake.
That's
And
dangerous.
believe me, I'm sorry, but I'm stepping out in front on this one because I was one of those who created the charter, and I know the intent of the original charter. And I have fought the fight for many, many years. There were times when we never even had a meeting with the selectmen. And we have not had a joint meeting like this for quite a long time. So, Paul, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, excuse me, my concern was the date of this is September 16th, which is a Monday, which implies that we're fitting into a Board of Selectmen's meeting as an item on the Board of Selectmen.
Exactly.
And I think the intent of this meeting is to do it as a separate meeting on a different time. Doesn't have to be a Saturday, maybe some other period of time we can have a joint meeting that deals with the issues that we've been talking about and that respects the charter. But by having it on the 16th, it seems to be squeezing it into an agenda item in the regular Board of Selectmen's meeting, and that, I don't think that's what was intended.
Yeah,
Well, we've set joint meetings aside on our Tuesday night, and we have nothing else.
right.
This is like a slap in the face. Well, this is what it's gotta be. I'm
Well,
sorry to be so
Let's be very,
vociferous, but I am on this.
no, I totally understand, but let's be very diplomatic about it and say we appreciate this offer. However, our intention is sticking with the charter of a joint selectmen's planning board meeting at a time convenient to both boards
Yeah.
and not as an agenda item.
Now, if they need to have us there for something to do with the wastewater management committee that we should be very much involved in, fine.
We'll
Put it
come
at the
too.
beginning of the meeting, we'll be there and help you
But
decide.
that's not a joint meeting.
That's not a
That's their
joint
meeting that we're attending.
Correct,
I like that.
Exactly.
as a matter of business that we need to be part of.
Good luck.
I know,
Well, we don't have to go.
it's true. But if it's a good thing, if it's something that the planning board should be taking part in because this has something to do with the long-term planning for the town, remember, under our LCP, we do have the water and wastewater element.
But it doesn't have to satisfy the joint meeting requirement. I think they're trying to get a 2-for-1 here. They're busy, they're just trying to get everything they need to do, and they're packing it in. And I think we should demand our meeting, and we'll go to 2 meetings. We'll go to their meeting and be part of their agenda for a smaller meeting, but don't call it a joint meeting.
Don't call it a joint meeting,
That satisfies the town
because it doesn't.
charter. I agree.
Oh,
I'd like to get Tom's opinion on how this is going on, because he's had discussions with the management of town. And and their perspective may be very different than
Yeah, but
our
he works for
perspective.
Julian Suso. His job is to convince us to do this. Okay, that's his supervisor, that's his payroll. I mean, Tom does a good job, but let's make it clear. He works for Julian Suso.
It's
and-
us who are
and look at
being
who the memo's from.
obstreperous here.
So
We
I,
seem to have one perspective, and there is another perspective, and I'd just like to hear that, regardless of who he reports to.
so I did point out to Julian, when we sat down and chatted last week, that, the planning board was under the impression that this was a meeting between, the planning board and, the Board of Selectmen. And then, months ago, I got an email from, Water Quality Committee going, oh, when's that meeting? We'd like to get on the agenda. And I replied back at that point to Pat and to Julian, I was under the impression the meeting was just these two bodies. So, when it came back again that water quality was gonna be on that meeting, I once again talked to Julian and then, expressed to him that the planning board is probably gonna have some pushback, on the fact that it's not a straight-up joint meeting. So Julian was happy to the fact that I gave him the heads up, because that's what I do. I don't like anybody to be blindsided with things. So I told him, chances are you're gonna hear from that. So that is when Julian, emailed back to, me and to Pat, and included Megan, Braga, the, English Braga, the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, who chimed in and said, well, we understand, but we've got these goodies to do. So, my job is to communicate with people and make sure everybody knows what everybody's concerns are, and try to work through them. And at this point, they basically said, well, what we've got on our agenda is what we have to do in advance of town meeting, following the close of the warrant. Probably in retrospect, we might have looked at the various dates that they gave and picked one prior to the warrant closing. I anticipated that a September, early September meeting would be before we were sort of in the crucible of town meeting. For us, because we haven't had hearings yet, but perhaps the selectmen were. So, my recommendation in my memo is perhaps we offer have a meeting, the planning board have a meeting, with the selectmen and invite them to our joint meeting. So we would have a Tuesday night meeting or a Saturday meeting, as the case may be, with the planning board, and the Board of Selectmen to talk about those issues as defined in the charter, and well in advance of, warrant closing for the annual town meeting in January. So we may suggest to them, we'll come into the meeting on, with you folks on the 16th, but we'd like to have a meeting, just the two of us, at some time in the fall, so we can have a full vetting of those concerns we have, including 40R and these other things. We've kind of been putting this list together, anticipating that it was gonna be an intimate affair with the planning board and the Board of Selectmen. And based on what we see, that's probably not gonna have the time for that. So let's pick another date, and reset that joint meeting, agenda for that time.
Am I right, Tom, in my reading of those memos, that the only thing that would be conceivably a joint meeting issue would be the Water and Wastewater Committee issue, whatever that is?
Yeah, when you look at what the charter says, the board shall hold a joint meeting at the very least twice a year with the planning board devoted exclusively to consideration of the town's master plan and other planning initiatives. That's what the charter says. And then it says the planning board will meet with the Board of Selectmen at least twice a year. So the needs of the Water Quality Committee on advancing the plans for that, certainly, as Pat points out, is within the LCP and would sort of meet the standard of, well, this is a joint meeting to talk about these other planning initiatives. But, putting us on the agenda with the discussion of the warrant, that seems to get outside of the bounds of what the charter anticipated. So I suggest that, as several members have said, we're at the September 16th meeting to hear what we need to hear with the Water Quality Committee, move that along, and then let's set a meeting for fall to have that really bona fide one-on-one joint meeting that most of us think is what the charter calls for.
If I could make one request, that it not be called a joint meeting, it not get the credence of a joint meeting,
So
but
we
we
get up
will
and
be
leave when,
there.
we get up and leave when that discussion's over.
And ask them to put it towards the front of their agenda,
Yeah.
so that we can then get up and leave
So on the 16th.
on the 16th.
But that's not a joint meeting.
It's not a joint meeting
We're
by any
attending one of
stretch
those
of the
meetings because they
imagination.
asked us to.
Right.
But they have to, we still have to have a joint meeting. I can tell you, I'm
Supposed
really.
to have two.
Two, I'm really looking forward to debating the selectmen on density, okay? what happens, a couple of them are believing that we should be building a Southport out in Hatchville. I mean, they have a totally different view, and we need to focus on those issues, because I think they're really, really important. On our density and on our local comprehensive plan. No one's paying attention to our local comprehensive plan that we're gonna build in our village centers. They don't even bring it up. We gotta hammer that point home, and I think that's a joint meeting, we do it just on those issues.
These are policies we're
Right.
talking about when you do joint meetings.
Right.
And it's an agreement on policy issues that we would be looking at. We're not shooting little tiddlywinks into a cup.
Right.
No, we're designing the game. So that's the point. You remember
Oh,
all
yeah.
of this.
Yeah,
That is the whole point of this type of meeting.
yeah.
If we don't get agreement from the two major elected boards in this town that create the face of Falmouth, we are in bad shape. But to do that, we have to be on the same page, and that's the point of the joint meetings.
Can I just ask a quick question? The last sentence here is very confusing to me, from Julian. I recognize and respect that Pat and members of the planning board have additional suggestions for one more joint agenda topics. That should have been a period. And then it's including revisiting the concept of the Community Development Initiative. So I'm a little confused. The Community Development Initiative, that's not going back to their community development person that they wanted to oversee
Yes, it is.
all the land
Well,
development.
well,
or
that-
is
and
it-
that's one of the things that I had suggested at our last meeting. And one of the things that I talked about is that we had this concept of the community development department. I called it the planning department last time, and then toggle back over to the community development department. That's something that's been talked about. It's in the Selectmen's strategic plan. It's one of the things that we had talked about when I was interviewing for the position. And I would certainly like to restart that conversation to see to what extent that goes to, in what direction. So that was one of the things that I had that I had suggested would be perhaps a topic of a joint meeting, is to talk about restarting that process again. I know it's been, I think it's 0 for 2. I don't think it was, and I'm still researching the history of it and looking at models and things like that. But I think at least to reinitiate that conversation. If people want to say this is dead forever and we don't ever want to go that way again, then that's fine. But I think that between the two boards, it would be one of those topics that, we just need to address, that I would prefer that we address.
I was just wondering where is that the same issue that had come up twice at town meeting?
That it is. But
Like a land use management department.
But, and as to be defined, not as was defined. So there's been a lot of work on that. I've been looking at the record, I've been looking at other models and things like that. But that's one of those things that I would like to see as part of a joint meeting.
Okay, just to clarify, thank you.
Charlotte?
But it seems like the joint meeting has turned into hash. So what we need to do now is sort out two things. Are we saying, yes, we're going to attend the meeting so that we can all discuss wastewater, but it's not a joint meeting by any means? So that would be one thing. And the other would be, the agenda for the joint meeting, when it happens, may or may not include discussion of a
Right.
community development initiative.
Right.
Because we already had discussion points that we wanted. So let's separate them out. Can we decide now on is it September 16th, the not joint meeting?
The not joint
The
meeting.
non-joint meeting.
That we would just attend the part dealing with wastewater management, or some representation
happy
from the
to do
board
that.
might.
And we would be happy to attend
Right.
as members of the planning board, but this is not a joint meeting.
Not a joint meeting. Okay, so that's one.
So,
Then
so in my
two-
notes, I have, the planning board will attend a joint meeting, but please put the planning board at the beginning of the agenda, so when that business is concluded.
Remove
Say that
the joint
again?
meeting part.
Remove the joint
We
meeting.
will come to their meeting and deal with their agenda.
Yeah, we will
Period.
attend.
We will
We're
attend.
attendees.
And deal with one agenda item, the wastewater
Wastewater,
management.
right.
When that's over, we can walk out.
Right.
So my note says 9/16/19, not a joint meeting, put planning board at the beginning of agenda. That's how I shorthanded it.
Well, I'd be even more specific, not a joint meeting, but the members of the planning board will, not happily, but will
Please,
attend
The Board of
meeting,
Selectmen
the
meeting.
Board of Selectmen meeting.
That one issue,
for that one issue.
Yes,
the one issue.
for the wastewater management issue. Agenda item, whatever.
So if that settles that, when would the joint meeting take place?
Well, I think that's the next part of the message, is that
Right.
the planning board would like a joint meeting, and we'd like to have it in this
As
year.
defined by the charter.
And let's look at November, December date.
Okay, and at some point, we want to discuss again what the agenda is going to be.
So currently, we have a list of items that includes update Board of Selectmen on zoning recodification, discuss affordable housing, density for housing, 40R for Davis Straits, sewer capacity, coastal resilience. Paul Dreyer had talked about truck deliveries on Main Street, diversion of large vehicles from Maine to Jones, alternate wayfaring route suggestions, shuttle options for school parking. And then I chimed in with my misquote of near the end of the August 13th meeting. I broached the subject of creating a planning department, which I should have called a community development department. I'm somewhat familiar with the history of this unsuccessful effort, and I know reviewing the record of the planning board had reservations about creating the position of a community development director. So those were, that's the shorthand for that sort of working list that we were sort of gonna finalize tonight, assuming that we were going to a joint meeting.
Charlotte?
I could be wrong, but I don't think the board at the moment has a position on the community development.
We don't, because it's not defined.
So we wouldn't be ready to go with it as a topic to a joint meeting. We need it as a topic here to discover what we think about that.
We have extra time to discuss it now.
And-
So
and-
right now?
We have extra months to discuss
Right,
this,
to
so.
discuss it.
So what's on this list now could change.
And the same thing with 40R. Can anyone here describe what 40R is and the implications of it? Are we ready to go have a discuss? I know, I was looking at you folks, not him.
Nope.
I spent a couple hours today, and I'm kind of surprised by everything that's in it, and I don't even understand it all. It's way too early. I would like to have a presentation to our board, so we can get our heads together and get around it and say, this is exactly what we agree. Not just, oh, it's a good idea.
I think you're
I'm not
absolutely
sure it is a good idea. I'm not sure it's a bad idea, but I'm challenging any one of you to get up and give a quick outline of what it is. And I won't do it either.
No, you're right, we need to know a lot
So
more
I'm not
about
ready
it.
to go to discuss something I don't know and understand.
Well, what, part of the program I was hoping to put together for that was to have someone from the HCD come down and talk about 40R with us.
So we have to make it, learn what it is and make a decision the same night, without any discussion amongst ourselves.
So,
I'm not comfortable with
You
that.
might not have said that.
Well, they're trying to do it all in one night.
no, not really. This is on a list that we were going to look at for discussion at a joint meeting. It isn't
But I
a-
don't even know what I want to discuss yet, because I don't understand it.
Right, so what we're all saying is we need somebody from DHCD to present to
Our
us.
meeting.
And we can invite, say, the ZBA and the Board of Selectmen, so that they can hear what's being said, and we usually will get a representative or two.
Right.
Well, 40R requires the sign-off of both the selectmen and the planning board. So
Right.
that's why it's a great topic for a joint meeting, because the selectmen have to essentially say, yes, we're willing to participate in 40R. We can put it on the warrant, we can talk about the zoning, but the selectmen have to say, yes, this is part of the statute, that this is something the town is going to engage in. So it's definitely joint meeting stuff to inform both boards as to what 40R is and how it works, from my perspective.
They did a very fine presentation at one of the Housing Institute, they were doing it every week. I went to the one in Mashpee. They did a great presentation on 40R. So I think it's,
What's the
Right, but it
percentage of
wouldn't be a joint-
three-bedroom homes in 40R?
He knows the answer.
I know the answer. I spent all day looking up because I'm concerned about this.
I don't,
50%. That is not in the vision that I had for Davis Straits building small little apartments.
I'm not arguing with you, I'm just
So
saying.
I'm
she
just saying,
made-
we're not ready.
We need
She
to be
made a
aware.
great presentation of 40R. And there is just, it's packed jammed
We
with
need it here in
stuff.
front of us.
Yeah,
But we
so,
don't
but
need a
this
joint
is,
meeting,
this
we
is,
need a
this
joint
is
training.
future. Yeah,
There's a
we need
difference.
joint
Different,
training.
I agree.
Big
Right.
difference, and that's
Right.
what we need, is a
I-
joint
That's a-
training.
I agree, that's a great way to put it.
And Paul, you wanted to ask something or say something?
Yeah, I want to add something to this. We have some concerns about a meeting with the wastewater advisory committee meeting. I'm the representative to that committee, and I've not attended the last two meetings for the simple reason is that they're spending all their time trying to finalize a report. They're going line by line over this report. I don't have a copy of it, so to attend that meeting didn't make a lot of sense. I've spoken to the chairman, and I told him that's the reason I was not at the meeting. So they're preparing this final report, 208 report, that they apparently want to talk about at some of these meetings. So by saying sewer capacity, I'm not sure that's what they're thinking of. I think you may want to ferret out a little bit about what their interest is in attending a meeting, because I can look at it, this report is going to be a very significant report, and it's going to impact the planning board as well as other departments. So I think there's a larger item that they're talking about than just meeting because they want to hone in on some activity. I think it's an important
And
element.
that's gonna be on the 16th, you think? but
I
we don't
don't
know what-
know. We need to find
we
that
don't know.
out rather than just dismiss their participation, because they have a big role here and they have and it impacts the planning department. And every time we have a project, the Board of Selectmen have to go in and say they want to override of the sewer capacity, and that affects the planning as well. So I think they have some very legitimate concerns to address with the Board of Selectmen and the planning board. It may not be the most appropriate time to do it here, but I would be very careful about dismissing why they want to be involved. I think there's a big element there that we're not aware of.
There may be, but it's still,
Still not what the charter calls for.
right. Or it could be, but it's, well, it's
There's
part
nothing
of our
stopping
meeting.
for them coming to one of our meetings and explaining it to us.
Right,
I just don't like the dilution of the joint meeting
Right.
with other boards. I mean, I think one year we had every board in town that we called it a joint meeting. It would, you know, that, we didn't get to focus on anything.
Tom, it would be really helpful before that meeting, if we could get some sort of a copy
Water quality
of
is what I'm
what,
referring to.
what the discussion might be like, so we go into that meeting with some knowledge of what they're gonna be talking about.
Excellent. And to Paul's point, he's our liaison to the Water Quality Committee, so we can get a copy of that report when it's ready for public release and sort of the executive summary, because I don't necessarily know that all of us are going to read that full report, but at least the copy of the report and the executive summary, so we're aware of what the topics are prior to coming into the meeting.
I thought Paul would highlight it, you know, like Cliff Notes for us. Right?
So I think we've beaten this joint meeting to death, and we want some
Hopefully.
advanced knowledge
Hope we do.
on whatever is gonna happen in regard to the water, the wastewater group, that we have to participate in, so we don't go in stupid. We know what we're going in there for.
Right.
Okay. Are there any committee reports? Paul just gave one, sort of the wastewater committee. Any other?
Yeah, we had our subcommittee meeting of the housing, it's not gonna be the housing summit now. We're gonna call it the Face of Affordable Housing, because all of us have heard from numerous people this concept of affordable housing. The people that are going into affordable housing are, you know, folks that are living out in tents in the woods, and we are going to be building affordable housing for them. If you listened carefully to some of the comments from Locust Field, from any of these developments where it's greater density and people feel it's infringing on their right to use adjoining property that they don't own, because they've been doing it for years. So we decided that we were going to use the face of affordable housing and actually have people that are in affordable housing, how they got there. Chief Dunn is going to be speaking, Christian Valley from the Valley Group. You know, I had everything.
There's a list of speakers, so.
Yeah, so we have some great speakers. I think it will go very well with them presenting 10 to 15 minutes, some questions. And we're getting the flyer together, and I think it will be a very positive, and hopefully we can get enough people to to dispel the myths that they have about who is living next door to them in affordable housing.
Thank you. Anybody else? Committee reports? Yeah, Paul.
Last Friday, there was a kickoff meeting here in this room for the Coastal Resiliency Action Committee. A state grant was awarded to the town, and a contract was signed with Woods Hole Group to do a section of Surf Drive to look at the various options need to be done. Unfortunately, it's a very limited time frame because it has to be done this fiscal year. But it was a good meeting. It was a meeting between the consultant and the various department heads, including the planning department and engineering and others. And they went over all the issues of what's being done and what they can do and what they cannot do. So I thought it was a very effective kickoff meeting, and very much looking forward to what the results of that study is.
I was at it with Paul, and I totally concur. They're not going to stuff it down our throats what we need to do. They'll be giving us options. Anybody else?
You want to add to that?
I'm waiting for the announcement section,
Okay, announcements.
if I may. I'd like to announce the draft brochure. I heard very clearly when Bob Leary was away watching TV and going, why isn't there a brochure that we had talked about some time back? We have two versions of the accessory housing brochure. They look very much the same, but if you flip them over, you'll see one has pictures on the back.
That's what I was looking
I
for.
love that.
I was gonna tell you, we needed
Yeah.
diagrams, that's what I
So at
didn't know
one
that.
point, we were talking about, we didn't like the diagrams, and we wanted to just talk about what's 1.9 square feet, what's 1.5 times this, what's 1.75 times this. So, while an earlier version said, let's, bag the graphics, the staff, I don't wanna say we revolted, but we thought it would be a great idea to have that, because not everybody knows what a gambrel is and a half-finished attic.
Yeah.
So if your house looks like that, this is the math that you use. So this is for an attached accessory dwelling. We're putting one together for for a detached accessory dwelling as well. So this is the brochure that will be putting down into the building department. They're easy enough to fix and move around, so if we get some feedback or negative feedback on those, we can amend the document. But staff-wise, we thought having that depiction, those images, at one point, I think they were stick-built drawings, but Melinda today went in and, pulled these images up and plugged them into the brochure to make what I think really, tells a nice story about how to put that together. So I do hear you, Bob, when you talk to me. Sometimes it just takes me a while to get out of my own way, so I apologize for that. But this is our draft brochure, and most of us think it's plenty swell with the depictions of the house on it. And the text inside says, if your house looks like A, measure the exterior of the house and multiply by 1.5. And if your house looks like B, measure the exterior of your house and multiply by 1.75. If it looks like C, measure the exterior of your house and multiply by 1.9. And if your house looks like D, measure the first floor and multiply by 2, because that's the size of your upstairs.
You needed A, B, C, D, you need an F. You need, when you take D and put shed dormers, you put dormers on it on the second floor, on the third floor. When you finish the third floor, you put dormer windows there, or a shed, because then it's 100%.
But we didn't necessarily have that in our bylaw.
I think we did, we talked about stairwell. Wasn't there one where we talked about if it had a stairwell going up to, there was 100%, I thought it was.
Well, the interesting thing is not everybody's house is a cube. I don't know that anybody has a house that doesn't have a foyer off of it, or a porch, or something like that. So those will be subject to a little bit of,
It's pretty close, but
Yeah, I mean, it's better than it was, so.
So we're just
This
trying to
is
make
great.
it easy for your folks to do this, for residents to do that, without having to hire full-on engineering.
Yeah.
To have to go full-on College Light Opera to do an accessory housing unit.
But just think of D with two dormers in the front and the shed dormer in the
Let's not
back and the
encourage
third
it.
floor that's 90%.
Let's not
Yeah.
talk about it.
It happens.
So this is only if you're building it
own
within
one.
the structure of your house, not,
No.
well, that's what it says.
Yeah, this is for attached. We're doing a separate one for detached,
Okay.
which
Okay,
requires a
okay.
bit more, effect of the single-family residence, so that one is a bit more,
But the calculations would be the same.
calculations would be the same.
For the
Right.
primary residence, and
Correct.
then you 40% of that, so the calculations would be the same.
I just wanted to make sure this
Yeah.
was the apartment.
Yeah.
In your-
Yeah, yeah, this says in, yeah. But the math is the same.
So, we have,
I think they should say thinking
Charlotte,
of
did you-
adding an accessory
Oh,
apartment to
yes.
your-
I think that your title's not clear, thinking about building an accessory apartment in your house. It certainly says what you mean, but it doesn't really put the emphasis on that this is for an attached within the same building accessory apartment. So I think it needs to be relabeled. I think where it says the first step is to schedule, then you'd accept, so what's step two? You look, no step two. So there's something wrong with the phraseology there. Here where you've got A, B, C, D, you go, there's no labels on that. Where do you find that? And then there are these little tiny things, difficult to find. Whereas if you took the how do I measure that, explain what that is, and put it right beside it, that would make more sense as a layout. There are just some layout issues here in the arrangement of the organization of the information.
So essentially, how do you measure that? Put those graphics next to how you measure that, and slide
Yeah.
the rest of that third panel
Just
elsewhere.
Take that.
I also think it should say, thinking about adding an accessory apartment to your house or within your house.
within, because this is just the in,
Right,
not not an unattached.
that's right. This is thinking about adding an accessory apartment within your house,
Mhm.
because that's what it is.
Mhm.
Building an accessory apartment in your house just sounds odd to me.
You'd build one outside.
Yeah, you, like,
That would be the
I'd
label
build
for
an
the
outhouse.
detached, perhaps.
Attached outhouse.
So we can do critiques and get them into Tom.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a way to do this.
Jim?
This is a big
I
step
know I didn't
forward.
make my point clear. I just want to point out an example. There's a big colonial on Main Street, okay, that has a third story, that has a shed dormer in the back and two dormers in the front, and it's totally finished. So they have 100% of the first floor, 100% of the second, and I'm saying that's 100% of the third. So when they're measuring their area, they would add that up, and we're leaving that out, and granted, what happens is these only come with pre-existing non-conforming uses, but our older homes have it, and there's one of them right over there. If you all remember the great big white house on Main Street, right there. Drive by it and look at it. It has a third floor, and and under the measurements I'm proposing, the third floor would be 100%, because it has a full shed dormer in the back and two doghouse in the front. Maybe it's really, not 100%, but 98%, but just.
That could just be done in words, though. You don't need an illustration. A full third floor.
Right. If it has a full third floor, with ceiling heights of 7 feet occupancy.
It can still only be up to 800 feet.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna
Well,
ask.
no, right. Well, 800, we're not changing the 800 feet,
Right, I mean-
but how you measure
Oh,
that.
I know what you're saying, though. It's gonna trigger
Pre-existing,
before
what
we-
happens is, pre-existing non-conforming structures are more than 2.5 stories.
Right, but it almost doesn't matter
'Cause we're
because.
At some point, if it's over 2,000 feet, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Right,
And most of those are gonna be over 2,000 feet. square
correct.
feet.
Yeah, but it could happen, I'm just saying.
Could.
They're what we call pre-existing non-conforming uses
Right.
that are more than 2.5 stories.
I think no matter what we do, though, Jim,
It's not perfect, okay.
yeah,
We're trying
we're
too
never
hard.
gonna have
Never gonna be
100%
perfect.
perfection.
All right.
Well, we're only gonna print about 25 at a time, so as we evolve. I don't have
That's a great idea.
a big printing contract.
I just wanted
for
to
the-
point out that they do exist.
I have no doubt.
So,
Almost there.
thank you for your very constructive feedback.
Okay.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Staff does most of this stuff.
Thank them for all their
They're
hard work.
very nice. I thank them every day. They are awesome, and I would be lost without them.
So we move on to general correspondence, so we can get closer to being out of here. I have a letter from the Town of Falmouth Marine and Environmental Services. There is a project that they're seeking support for, and that's the Town of Falmouth is evaluating engagement of commercial aquaculture contractors to remove nitrogen from impaired estuaries by growing and harvesting oysters using floating gear. Any comments have to be in by September 10th, so if you want to add to this, it's here, see it in the planning office. Then there is a letter from Housing Assistance. Register at,
I believe that's the letter that I forwarded to the board previously to register for Housing
Yeah.
Assistance Corporation's
Right.
Housing Summit.
November 15th,
right.
at the
So-
Hyannis,
The date's November,
November 15th, 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m.
where, and it's at Hyannis,
That's what I'm.
Is the Cape
thinking.
Cod or the for
the Cape,
It's
yes,
usually at the Cape
Cape
Cod, I
Codder.
think.
Cape Cod Inn, whatever
Cape
it's
Cod
called,
Inn?
in Hyannis. So we could have a stream of cars. That's not what I
Anyway,
meant to say.
both of these are,
Carpool.
They've
Going
been
to be-
emailed to us, so.
so,
Can I make
we're
one
in the,
other comment?
yeah.
I'd like to make one other comment. This morning at 8 o'clock, there was inauguration of the new all-turf field at the high school. It was extremely well-attended. It was chaired, or the maitre d' was a school superintendent, and a lot of people spoke at it. And they had a student from middle school read the Pledge of Allegiance, and a young woman from high school did the national anthem. It was very well attended. It had the football team, the school board. Every teacher was there because the first day back at school. The kids spent a couple hours after walking around on the field and whatnot. And there wasn't a parking space to be had. It was like it was the race weekend at the expo at the high school. So it was extremely well attended. It was very well done. And too bad more of you were not there.
Were we invited?
I was.
I wasn't.
I wasn't.
I didn't know about it.
I didn't know
The
about
band
it
was
either.
there, the color guard was there, and they.
Why
were
didn't
very
you tell
well
us
attended.
about it, Paul?
I got an email like everyone else.
So do we have,
I didn't get an
Told Mr.
email.
Bott
No.
about it. He
so
didn't
it was
get
in
it.
the Enterprise.
Yeah. it was in
Well,
there.
I missed
It
that.
was quite an event. Worth,
You're lucky you got invited. You're special.
you're finally realizing.
so we obviously have a few future agenda items. Education on 40R.
Teasing you.
There were others that came up today that we need to look at a little more closely. We need to be discussing the community development
Yes.
department. Part of that is when you call it community development department, my brain says, no, that's all wrong. It's community development division, as it's really imagined to be.
Just leave off the organizational part, community development.
Development,
Let's talk about it.
absolutely. So we need to have that as part of our discussion. Any other future agenda items?
No, I think we got a full plate.
I think that's a pretty full plate, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Because they're serious discussions. Next meeting?
Before we get
Oh,
to that,
Okay.
could I just say, it sounds like from the number of regrets I didn't get, that you all are coming to the planning board get-together, social, on Friday. I'm really pleased with this. This is great, 5:30, and this will be great. Thank you. I just want to say one little thing about the parking. I have a steep driveway, and at the foot of the driveway, there's room for about 7 cars, and that's it. So if you come a little later, park at the top of the driveway and walk down, wear sneakers.
Park where?
The first 7 cars can park down at the foot of the driveway, but the rest have to park up at the top of the hill.
How many square feet is your house, so we can calculate how many spaces we need?
It's very
I'm
big.
not telling you.
It's very large.
It is a medium place.
Okay, the
Good
next
thing it's not in
meeting,
the wintertime, because I think
Oh.
stopping her in a driveway would be difficult.
the next meeting is September 10th.
Move to adjourn.
Second. All in
We
favor?
are
Aye.
adjourned.